Going on with Yoga Explained this evening, we have two more lectures in this particular series, the one tonight and the one next week, which has to do with the instrument of intuition by which we know soul knowledge. You've heard me say, and I know you've read and talked about it, that God is not known through the senses, mind, nor intellect, but easily he is known through the intuition of the soul, which is love. Let us remember that as we discuss a little bit. Review last week how the soul can be realized, or perhaps we might rather say how we can attain that state of consciousness whereby we can, in the next step, realize the soul. Because the soul can be realized only through intuition, but sometimes you cannot utilize intuition until you reach that state of consciousness where it flows through you. And so, how to do that? How to take the preliminary steps? Well, first, people who think that you can sit down and that's all that's necessary to realize God, they are mistaken. Action is necessary. Action is necessary. As our Master said, and all the scriptures say, meditation plus activity is necessary. And the action, to be sure, it is not binding you to the body or to this worldly existence. The action must be unattached. Now, how are you going to do that? How are you going to be sure of that? Very easy. In a very easy way. Whatever action you do to please God. That's the safest way, whether it be plowing the fields or working or whatever it is. Do it to please God, even if it's action you do not like. Do it to please God. So that's the first step. And the next step, of course, is meditation, because God is a spirit and must be known through spirit. And meditation means contact through the concentration of God. So don't think just sitting down and meditating in a haphazard way or anything less than a scientific way will take you into the presence of God. It will not. But right meditation will. That meditation in which you use your concentration to get into the presence of God. That's the second step. And the third step is yoga practice. Because not many people, or not the majority of people at least, can have a tranquil mind, which is so important to practice yoga or to do anything that is leading toward the soul. If the lake of your mind is restless, you cannot approach the presence of God. That's why Master was always saying, the lake of the mind must be still. The lake of the mind must be still. Analyze yourselves. Introspect yourselves. And if you find in your daily work there's a restlessness there, do something about it. Take your yoga into your daily activities. Practice it. We have many meditations and techniques which help the devotee to attain tranquility of mind. That's why you practice yoga. For that purpose. Of course, yoga means union, but you cannot attain union without tranquility of mind. So, we must realize that yoga practice will give you tranquility of mind, which is so important to realize what one thing. Yes, you say the presence of God. That's right, yes. But in that presence of God, when you feel that, there's no separation between you and your Father. Is there any separation between us here? In the ordinary sense of the word, you see me, I see you, we're in each other's presence. So if you can do that with your Father, and attain that tranquility of mind, and then you will attain His presence and there'll be no separation. But if my mind is restless now and moving back and forth, and I can't see you even. So it's the same with the Father. Attain that tranquility of mind by the practice of yoga. And then you can meditate on God and attain His presence. Yoga is the first step one of the greatest actions is the practice of scientific yoga, which means union with God. Now, going on a little further, the soul must reascend. Sorry for us, but we have descended down to where we find ourselves. We, the children of God, who had his own consciousness and lived as one in his consciousness, or one with his consciousness, have lost it. We have descended down through various steps, and so to regain that, we must reascend through these various steps. One of the great saints of India said that all steps are necessary. Some people want to jump right into the presence of God and land right there ready for business. But you cannot do it that way. You have to, step by step, attain his presence. And so every soul has to reascend or go through the same steps which that soul passed through as it attained ego consciousness. That's all. Because when you're in ego consciousness, you know you're separated from God. You do not feel that oneness with him. And so we have to reascend step by step through the same steps which we lost contact with God. Since we left, as it says in the scripture, our first love. That's why we're in trouble. We have to once more be able at will to feel oneness with him. So, what do we have to do? First, the three bodies with the limited consciousness. Every consciousness is limited unless it's one with God's omnipresence. It's limited. And so these three bodies, with their limited states of consciousness, the physical body, the subtle body, or the electronic body, plus the causal body, they have to be superseded. We have to rise above them step by step. And also, in so doing, we have to rise above the three macrocosmic states of consciousness, or world states, or world isn't the word, universal states of consciousness, or the corresponding three macrocosmic states of consciousness, the physical universe, the astral universe, and the causal universe. We have to reascend because we came down through those steps. It's not so difficult. If you just think of your body as the microcosmic aspect of God, the physical universe, as the physical universe, and then within you is an electronic body, which has a universal correspondence in the astral universe, or the astral macrocosm, and then you know within yourselves that you have the ability to form ideas and thoughts and so forth, and sometimes you can manifest them. That's the causal body. Now just remember, there is corresponding to those three states the universal state of consciousness as the physical universe, the astral universe, and the causal universe. We have to pass through those states of consciousness to be free from them. We have to reascend the way we came down. And within you have the material consciousness of the body, and then you supersede that, and you have in the body you have the subconsciousness, and finally the superconsciousness, which is the ego consciousness or soul consciousness attached to the body. We have to reascend through those different states of consciousness so that we know them, that's all. And as you meditate, you easily rise above bodily consciousness, and many of you rise above the consciousness of the physical universe, because it doesn't exist. And then if you keep on, you'll supersede the astral body, and then the astral universe, and finally the causal body, where no thought exists, just the feeling of God's love. And then if you can expand that so that you feel it above, beneath, on the left and on the right, without end, eternity, then you have reached freedom. That's God's presence within you. It doesn't take us long to get down and limit it again, does it? We just have to make it our second nature. Having that, you'll want nothing else, because having God's presence, you have all things. So how should we do this? Well, As I have said, we practice yoga. You cannot overcome the mind by just sitting down and saying, thoughts stop. They won't stop and you know it. But by the practice of yoga, by the different techniques which have been given to us by our Master under the title of Self-Realization Fellowship Yoga, you can do it. You can reach that point where the grace of God can come into you and stop your thoughts and give you freedom from the turmoil of a racing mind. And that's the first thing we have to do. It's very difficult to do it without developing concentration through the practice of yoga. Some people can do it, some business people, but they've developed that concentration. All can develop that concentration through the practice of yoga. And that's first. That's why concentration is so important in the finding of the presence of God. Because we have to be able to point the mind on one thing. And in the final analysis, the goal of life is to unite our consciousness with God's consciousness. How can you do it unless you have concentration? Having concentration, then you've got a chance. So yoga is very important, and those who practice it will find a steady growth toward lack of restlessness and a feeling of a peace within, and finally a feeling of the love of the infinite. If you once taste it, you'll never want anything else. Yoga is so important. And so, yoga helps us to say it this way, to unattach the soul, which has become ego conscious. The soul's all right. The soul is God himself, a ray of the infinite spirit. But when it becomes attached, it's anything but right. You take a person, sometimes you've seen them. Ordinarily, they're calm, quite calm, and they're easy to get along with them. But if you let restlessness get in there, and anger and greed and such things, then you look at them. It's still the soul, but it's mighty muddy. It's covered over. That's what we have to avoid. Avoid those things, and to release the soul from attachment. The story of the prodigal son, which you read in the Bible, is none other than the soul returning home to his father's house. He went out and he got into a mess, and with riotous living and all sorts of things. But then again, he was ashamed, and he came back to his father, and his father received him just as our one eternal Father will receive us when we turn back to him. I know Master told me many times, he says, there's great rejoicing in heaven when a prodigal soul returns. And so that's what the soul has to do. It wants to, but sometimes it has to pay the price of its being separated from God. And as it says in the Bible, when the prodigal soul encountered all the remorse of separation, that's what will do it. When you feel the remorse of separation from God, and you feel it enough, then you'll get down and do business with yoga and your meditation. That means that deep within your soul is the recollection, doesn't it, that you were once with your Father? Otherwise, how could such remorse come? When you feel that, just a little taste, the Lord will give it to all of us. I guess when we've suffered enough. And then we will really get down and do something with our yoga, our meditation, and with our determination to find that which is our birthright, oneness with the Father. No separation. That's the worst sin, is separation from Him. And so, when we have recovered, when we have been subjected to so much tribulation that we feel the remorse of being separated from Him whose love we had, then we will turn with real effort back to God. And so the prodigal son comes home to his father's home. And what's his home? Divine love, that's all. Divine love is the greatest thing. The nations need one thing, as you all know, and that's God's love. Those who have habits which seemingly cannot be overcome, they need one thing. They need to feel the remorse of separation from God and throw themselves at His feet, and then they will win. And that applies to everything that we seemingly cannot control. That's the greatest thing, is God's love. There's nothing will touch it. Having that, you'll want nothing else, because you'll have everything. The only thing that we really lack is oneness with God. It's that separation which is the worst thing. But we attribute it to all sorts of things. Lack of money, lack of this, lack of that. A million things. It's only one thing. The presence of God is what we need. So we can say, as Lord Shankar said, I am He, blissful Spirit. I am. Well, we have a few references from Hindu philosophy first. From the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons, which I know many of you subscribe to. If you don't, you should. You'll find the epitome of truth there in these lessons. So there we find that the soul is immortal, and that the conservation of psychical energy, so to speak, is just as much a law as the conservation of physical energy. Nothing is lost. This material universe, matter changes into electromagnetic force and finally into light. So, if that is so, how much more so is it true that our soul, with the energy of God in it, His consciousness plus His cosmic energy, nothing is lost. And so we put on this vehicle for a little while, and then we get another one. But the soul is never lost, always was and always will be. And so in the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons, we have this pointed out clearly. The soul is immortal, and therefore the soul encased in a mortal body now existed before and will always exist. Whatever state of existence it is in, covered up with some body or not, the soul always was and will be, because that's God Himself. Otherwise, how can I see that flower? How can I see you all? How can I hear? How can I think? How can I rise above senses, thoughts, and senses, mind, thoughts, and intellect, and see? And you all can see the spiritual eye if you'll try. Or perhaps see regions beyond. How? Because that consciousness always was and always will be. We have to know it and make it dynamic to our consciousness. And so, we can realize these things. Supersensuous phenomena, or realization, they call it, just because you can't see it with all of it with the physical eye. But you see it in a more direct way, in a more vivid way than as you see with these physical eyes. Because it's seen with the soul's power of intuition. And that doesn't make any mistake. This can be done by the practice of yoga, plus, in the finality, by the grace of God. And so the soul in its perfect state is superconsciousness, or, as I have pointed out here, body confined love and joy. That's what it is. That's what the soul is. If it wasn't confined to the body, it would just be overwhelming. But it is confined to the body, and therefore it's a little limited. But when you rise above the body, then you will know the soul as unconfined love and joy. And the soul knows all these things through the power of intuition, which does not fail, which does not delude us. We follow in this life and we think we're progressing nicely, and suddenly the bottom falls out. It doesn't make any difference what line you're in. Don't put any faith in it. Do your work. Do the best you can, otherwise you won't please God. But don't put any faith in anything but God alone. And you'll never be disappointed. Master always told me over and over and again, and that's why I tell you, leave all else but never leave God's side. Even if you have the money right in your hand, don't have any faith. Father, I want you. Because the money has ways of getting out, slipping away. So do things of this life. Now, the Bhagavad Gita says, so much for Hindu philosophy, just a few little things which I took from the Master's lessons, self-realization lessons. And from the Bhagavad Gita we read, do all things with the consciousness of God and soul consciousness. Or as the Master puts it in a simple way, do all things to please God. You cannot fail. And you'll find, if you're honest with yourself, how the ego begins to let go. But if you're not honest with yourself, you will not get the result. But do everything. It doesn't make any difference what it is. If it's the most disagreeable thing, then Lord, I hate it, but I do it to please Thee. And it will work. Because you will feel in yourself the desire to please God. The show has its good parts, its tragic parts, its parts of comedy. If you know it's a show, do you care what you play? Well, some of us do. But really we shouldn't. It's God's play. He's satisfied with us to play, what do they call those little parts in forgotten about the show business. Well, you know, just a secondary part. Or he wants you to play the leading man. Fine, but don't be attached to either one. Because the fulfillment is not in the playing of the show, but it's in feeling and knowing that it is a show and that you are not a part of it. Now, from the Bible, one or two references. From Luke, the 15th verse, the 21st, 23rd, and 24th verses. This is just a little repetition of the prodigal son returning home, and here it points out that when the prodigal son came to the father, you can talk to the father the same way. Father, I have sinned against thee. Now I'm coming back. You'll find he will be very nice to you. And so it says here, and the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servant, Bring the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And then also, let us make merry, bring the fatted calf, let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead. This is the important thing. You might just as well be dead than to be separated from God. Isn't that so? To be one with God means life eternal. To be one with God's love. Not to be one with His love means death eternal. And so these scriptures are true. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And then they made merry. That's why Master said, when we turn back to God, the prodigal son returns home, there's great rejoicing in heaven. And so, there we have the illustration of the prodigal son, right from our Bible. And then one other reference from Revelation, which can be applied here. Revelation, the 2nd chapter, the 4th verse. And this pertains to the fact that we find it very difficult to return home to God. It is very difficult. There's no question about it. We want to, but somehow we have to pay the price, so to speak. Why? Why? Because, as we spoke a few minutes ago, we have left our first love. We have left God's side. And we've got to somehow get back there. And so here we read, I know thy works, thy labor, and thy patience, and thou canst not bear those which do evil. And thou hast tried those which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars, and hath borne, and hath patience, and for my name's sake hath labored, and hath not fainted. Now that's doing quite a little bit for God, isn't it? But then it goes on, nevertheless, I am somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. Somewhat against thee. Let's rejoice, he isn't wholly against it. His mercy endureth forever. And finally, just a little inspiration from a great saint, which I quote once in a while, Kabir. Kabir says as follows, and this applies to every one of us. It doesn't mean we should be shirkers. It means we should do our duty to a greater extent when we are following the path home to God, because God doesn't like shirkers. I'm sure of that. I've heard the Master say it. And so we read from Kabir, remain apart from the world. Now that doesn't mean not to be active in worldly things. We have to do that. We have to, more or less. But we can do it in a way in which we take God with us in everything we do. So Kabir says, remain apart from the world, as water refuses to mingle with oil. You can put water and oil together and shake them up, but they won't mingle. So we must be with this worldly living. Deposit your heart. That's the key. Where the heart is or desires to go, there the result will be. Deposit your heart where is neither death nor dungeons of cow or ignorance. Where is that? With God. Be in the world, but not of it. Larry Marshall was the greatest example. He lived in the world, but he was with God. So can each one of us. It doesn't make any difference what we're doing. We can do it because God's in us and we can be with Him. And one other reference in Kabir, which is very applicable to tonight's discussion. And here we have the true value set before us of following the path which leads to God. First he says, we shall not die, though all creation die. Think of it. We feel, well, they blow this planet up. Where are we going to be? We're going to be right where we are, according to our consciousness of the presence of God. And so, Kabir says, we shall not die, though all creation die. We have found one that quickeneth. That's the Lord. Finally, he says, whoever forsakes what is false and productive of pride and becomes as dust on the road, he will find God. So let us bury our pride. Sometimes it's hard to do it, but if we have God, who cares? I'd rather have nothing, as long as I felt one with God, hadn't you? That's the lesson tonight.